So welcome, everyone. Everyone can hear me okay? Great job, Paul. Thank you for that introduction. As you know, Paul's a relationship manager with the WCB, and I'm sure you're familiar with the great work he does, and that includes spearheading today's event, so very thankful for that. I wanted to just make sure, I guess a big part of today is really about, our role in all of this is making sure you don't feel like you're alone. We work together, and working together is a key strategic goal for our organization. We recognize, I often say to our staff, we don't have the injuries, we don't create the return to work opportunities, so we need to be influential. We need to find ways to help others achieve success or create those conditions for success. I am going to speak about leadership. I do believe that leadership is a privilege, and that we have a real responsibility. And I know for the people in this room, as federal government employees, the public demands accountability. And I know you feel that responsibility to shoulder that. And that relationship that we have is evolving, but we know that we can do better. And we know that if we don't get to a place where we protect people, and it's not to say there's not a lot of good things that are going on out there, but how do we actually work together to make sure we create the best conditions for success? That's really what today is about. I want to acknowledge the cooperation and teamwork, first of all, that went into the development of our fishing strategy in Nova Scotia. Fishing is a very important industry in this province. And as an example, Environment Canada, DFO, Coast Guard, Transport Canada, Transportation Safety Board, there was all kinds of federal government involvement in coming up with a solution, a fishing safety strategy or a fishing action plan that's actually led to massive changes in our fishing sector. It's one of the most entrenched cultures in our province, and you may be surprised to hear that payroll in 2014 was up 17%, but actually costs were down 34%. So this is an industry that we thought will never be able to change, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But it's significant because when you ask yourself the question, can it be done? Sometimes we think it's very difficult and it's hard to change culture. But there's a great example where people came together and said, what are the things that we need to do? This needs to be a priority and things can be different. When we think of leadership, the importance of leadership, which is really what we'd like to speak about today, we have a workplace safety strategy in this province, and that really was where people came together to talk about what are the things in injury prevention. What's our strategy? What does that look like? And that was a couple of years ago. We did that in partnership with the Department of Environment and Labor. But the difference in Nova Scotia with this strategy is the first time we did it, it was really us creating an inventory and saying, and Paul's smiling because he was part of this, but we sort of checked the boxes. We said, let's do awareness, let's do leadership, let's find ways to have incentives, let's find ways to do practice leadership on ergonomics, different practice things. But really it was us creating the foundation. The difference this time is this strategy is about people. We consulted with hundreds of people in coming up with this strategy. And really it's about what's the role for the individual in it? What's the role for companies in it? Everyone needs to see themselves in a strategy if it's really about behavioral change and it's about culture. And that's really what makes this one different. And our objective is to be the safest place to work in Canada. That's the vision. And we recognize that in order to achieve that, we need to move from a culture of knowing about safety, where you check the boxes. In other words, the boss says, okay, make sure we're compliant so we don't get fined or we don't want to have any public confidence issues, to how do we move to caring about it, where we're giving workers the permission to only do something if they can do it safely, and there's a caring environment. A big part of the reason for that progress, we've had a lot of progress in our province and some of the things that happened in fishing, but a big part was candor. Believe it or not, when we were in the fishing sector, we talked about everything from alcohol, marijuana, you want to name it. We talked about it all. Everything was put on the table, gloves off. Talking about what needs to be said. Candor is important if you want to change culture. And each and every one of you in this room is in a position to influence change. Change is inevitable, we know that. But this is about a mind shift. It's not about what does it cost you to pay premiums. It should be about what are you investing in to see a safer workplace. And we've seen that time and time again. Like all of your jurisdictions, you have a very small percentage of the employers that has a very high percentage of the payroll base. I think in Ontario, I think they said 100 employers have, 80% of the payroll. Here in Nova Scotia, we have about 300 companies that have about 60% of the payroll. There'll be statistics that would be similar. But you talk about economies of scale and the ability to influence. Anyway, if we can get to that investment philosophy or that mindset change, it's important. I'd like to tell you a story. I am Stuart MacLean. I'm not the CBC guy, but I have to have a story every day. And I had this opportunity when we were doing our first strategy. We said, let's meet with the people who are having difficulty. So I went out to see a CEO and his executive team one time and said, look, we put a presentation on, talked to them about their injuries, talked about what was happening in the organization, trying to create that dissatisfaction with status quo. So try to get his engagement. Because we know with leaders that what my boss finds interesting, I find fascinating. Right? So if we can get that top leader to be really engaged and in, we're good. And the question that he asked me will always stay with me, because he said, at the end of it all, he said, what will it cost me to be average? And my response to him, which he didn't like very much, was, it's the wrong question. Because it's not about what we're going to do, it's what you need to do. And it's how do we help you do that? Yes, we're an equal partner in all of this, and do we have a role? Absolutely we do. But you have to look in the mirror and say, there's something that you need to do as the employer. And, I was actually with my CEO at the time. She was trying to get me calmed down because we had that session. But 6 months into the future, after we'd been working with him and he had understood the impact and how he could be influential, it was interesting because I hadn't really seen this shift. But we went to their annual meeting, and he asked me to do the same presentation for all of their leaders. And I stood up at the front of the room and I did the presentation, and I'll always remember what happened then, because this is how it can be different. After that, I spoke. Everyone looks to the CEO to make a comment. The CEO looks down at his paper. There was you know how 10 seconds can seem like a long time? Well, it was one of those moments. He pushed himself away and he stood up at the table. And what he said was, we're hurting too many people. We're a leader in Nova Scotia as a business, yet we have an unacceptable record of injuring people in the job. We're going to measure this, we're going to manage it, and any one of you who doesn't get along with the program or can't figure this out is not going to be with the company. Now, you think things changed? It was dramatic, right? The injuries dropped almost immediately. Why did that happen? Well, part of it was because what my boss finds interesting, I find fascinating, and the people in that room suddenly understood there was a role for them. And it's easy to get behind health and safety because it makes a difference in people's lives. It keeps your staff safe. When you look at the cost of your premiums and you say, that's a lot of money, when you really look at the cost of what workers' compensation or the injury is costing you, it's a lot more than that. Because you've got to retrain people, there's all the disruption in the workforce, there's the culture. We know that with good workers' compensation programs and with success there, that your short-term disability, your long-term disability, your staff engagement, your labor relations, these things are all inextricably linked. And we've seen that happen over and over again. So when it comes to safety, I would say average isn't good enough. And I know the people in this room you didn't get to where you are today by being average. You get today because you care about something, you find passion, and you bring it to it. And I would say that if you say, well, are we good? Is good enough? I think good is never good enough, and when it comes to health and safety. There's an opportunity. Things are changing here in Nova Scotia. I'm going to speak a little bit about Nova Scotia for a moment. We have more media coverage. That means the media is getting behind us. That's a good thing. More inspectors have been hired by the Department of Labor, recognizing that we need to do a better job there. Special prosecutors have been hired. We've also seen charges that have been laid under C-45, the Westray bill. And that bill's been in place for about 10 years, and we finally see charges laid under that bill. Now, we don't know the details of that, but we know it's a good thing when we have sending messages. The culture is changing. And I'm proud of what we've accomplished in all of this. When we look at the facts here in Nova Scotia, we were down by about 35% in our time loss injuries in the last 10 years. That's a really good thing. But the intractability in the last year of how it's come down and sort of stabilized, we recognize the easy stuff is gone. And now we really have to roll up our sleeves to figure out how do we get to the next level. So when we're really seeing this culture shift take hold, we also have a report in Nova Scotia called the Ivany Report. It's referred to as Now or Never. And it talks a lot about the need for immigrants. We have an aging demographic. This sounds very familiar. If you read the annual reports of the WSIB, I know a lot of you are from Ontario. I was reading some of that stuff last night in anticipation for today. You've got the same goals, the same things are going on. You've got the same aging demographic, the same challenges. You've got an unfunded liability. We have a lot of things that are very common right across Canada. But the Ivany report is about people and it's about economics. In Nova Scotia, so is the WCB, and so is in all the jurisdictions in Canada. We're having trouble finding nurses, yet we've got hundreds of them that are at home right now in our healthcare system. So you think about that. We're bringing people from BC to work, and we've got hundreds of people that are at home. We're trying to bring people new. You've all been hearing about the news and the Syrian refugees and all the different world problems that we have. We're trying to bring people to Nova Scotia to make it their home. We have to make sure that we bring them to safe workplaces, that we find ways to integrate them with the language challenges and the language barriers that they're going to achieve. So these things are complicated that we deal with but we believe in this province that the greatest asset is our people. The best place for those people is healthy and working and on the job. We need to pay people to work. We don't need to pay people to stay home. And that's an important concept. I know that ultimately we're here for the injured worker, but the thing is, these things, we believe that all our injuries are preventable, and we believe there's a role for us in all that. We're going to have a video which was produced by WCB and also our partners at Advanced Education. It's about leadership. Strong leadership in organizations is more important now than it ever has been. We have the ability opportunity to impact change, influence, create safer workplaces, and I believe right across Canada, we're seeing that safety culture emerge. We've seen reductions in time. We're not alone with progress. Everyone's made progress. People are understanding that it's an HR discipline. This is something that if you're intentioned on, you can make a difference, and it's not just better for your premiums, it's better for this country, and it's better for the people who work here. When we're healthy and injury-free, we get to the things that matter the most to us. And in Nova Scotia, that's spending time with friends and family, participate in community activities, volunteering, just all of those things. Whether it's walking your dog, whatever it is that gives you joy, that's really what being safe should be connected to. I'd just like to say, just before we watch the movie, I want to speak about the internal responsibility just for a second, because I believe that anyone can be a leader. And I think as leaders at the business level, we have the ability to influence culture. So if you think about the internal responsibility system, what that's about is the right to refuse unsafe work, it's the right to know, and the right to participate in health and safety programming. Those things are rights that are actually in Nova Scotia in our legislation. The way I sum that up, you can say, oh, what are they, and try to remember what they are, and it's really difficult. But you think about it culturally, it's very simplest. Only do something if you can do it safely. If you give your employees that permission, what that says to them is, I'm more important than productivity. If I feel uncomfortable in this situation, I can tell you, my staff, if they're coming across the causeway and there's a big storm and they're worried about driving, and they pull off and get a motel and they say, oh, it's not sure I'm going to be able to get paid for that, guaranteed that no one's going to get pushback on anything in health and safety in our organization, because we need to walk the talk. We need to create that safe work environment. And I'll say it one more time, only do something if you can do it safely. That's important to me. As leaders, you move from knowing to caring, and I think that's really what leadership can be about, to get people home safe at the end of the day. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore for a second. I'd like to show the video. If we could hit that video for us, please.
What does it mean to be a leader? Is it a title, a bigger office, the perks that come with being the boss? Or is it about more than a position, a responsibility to lead, to be the one others look to do what's right, to make the calls that need to be made? It is a leader who has the courage to follow through, to keep a promise, to stand by his word, even if it means standing alone. It is a leader who asks as much of herself as she does of others, who rises up, looks the easy answer in the eye, and says, no. We can do better. We can do more to make our workplace safe for every one of us, or 1,000 of us who put in an honest day's work and need to get home to what matters most. It is a leader who says nothing comes before safety. I will do all that I can so you can do all that you can to make sure no one gets hurt. Not on my watch. It is a leader who believes that the time is now to step forward, to work together, to create one Nova Scotia that is strong and safe for the future. And when it's time to take what is written on paper and put it into practice, it is a leader who knows that actions speak the loudest. And instead of pointing out what others can do, simply asks, what more can I do to help us all work safe? Because nothing matters more.
So a lot about leadership is connecting the dots. I know there's the images in there that some people see something. I know I see that little girl sitting on the log with her mother, and that tells me why I need to come to work every day. And, so in closing, how do we create the imperative for change, and how do you get a worker to work differently? Because I know people in this room, I'm speaking to the converted to a great degree. So in Nova Scotia, I'll just give you some examples. The Westray Act. We had a terrible disaster in this province. In mining, the Westray disaster led to sweeping changes in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The Act changed, things became safer because of that. As I mentioned to you, we've had a focus on it for a number of years. In the last 10 years, for example, a 35% reduction in injury. So we had something that changed our law. In fishing, spoke about that a little bit earlier. We had the Miss Alley disaster. You guys saw it play out on television where 5 young people in a massive storm didn't come home to their families. So there's spouses, there's children, there's all of that. And the tight-knit community had to come together, and we then had the conditions for having a conversation. An interesting thing about that is the report is just done with its 33 recommendations, yet we've seen all this progress already. And it's been about grassroots. The conversations have led to other things, and there's residual benefits from that. In construction, we've had a safety association that's worked with us diligently to reduce their claims, educate their workforce. Yet we had a 21-year-old go off a 6-story building about a year and a half ago. And at that time, the construction sector said, inspect us. Let's have more inspections. We need to actually get our compliance levels up, and those compliance levels have come up. But that's a very different place than we've been than the construction sector saying, go bug somebody else, which is what the conversation used to be. So there's signs of an emerging safety culture. The federal government employees, you aren't faced with the challenges at work like these industries are, because you don't necessarily see high perspective or high, the fatalities that basically are in the press and all those kinds of things. So it's a little bit different. But what you have in common is the need to come together to create change. And what those industries did is they had a role in it. And this is what I'm calling you to today, because I think it's what you need to do that we want to talk about. Change takes leadership, and all of you know that that's why you're here today, because you are those leaders. So taking hold of that responsibility to make workplaces as safe as they can be is really the outcome of today that we're looking for. And what I'm asking you to do is to know, not just know about it, to care about safety. We talked about that before. And in your day-to-day, if you do something, make sure that you only do it if you can do it safely. So have a great day, and thank you very much for having me here to share some comments with you. Appreciate it.